like to start by thanking Speaker McCarthy for his service. Uh, we had a great personal relationship, trying to lead two very different uh, parts of the American government. I think he has much to be proud of. Um, we avoided a government shutdown. We did the inevitable with regard to the debt ceiling, and I'm one person who's extremely grateful for his service. I have no advice to give to House Republicans except one. I hope whoever the next speaker is gets rid of the motion to vacate. I think it makes the speaker's job impossible. And the American people expect us to have a functioning government. On the Senate side, we need to get our as many appropriation bills passed as possible. The majority leader has indicated that's what he would like to do as well. And he'll have plenty of cooperation from us in trying to achieve as close.
Well, there you have it. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. He obviously did not like the fact that the House Republicans went along with the extremist in the party to oust the speaker. It's in chaos. We're going to talk about that this morning. But it's affecting, and it's going to affect everyone. So we'll talk about that as well. We'll also talk about Power 96's flip phone, because it went off along with the rest of the phones yesterday, as he reminds us in the chat today. Healthcare workers are on strike, 75,000 across the country. It's strike time for everybody, it seems. We'll discuss the healthcare workers strike. And Joe Biden, the president, has advised Americans how to speak with relatives who are down with the MAGA crowd. And we'll tell you what he had to say about that. And he also was busy adding another $9 billion in student loan forgiveness, despite the Supreme Court and the extreme MAGA Republicans' desire to not allow anyone to have any type of debt forgiveness. And we will finally tell you what was Elon Musk's Twitter strategy and who helped him out. We got some details for you all. But first, picketing began yesterday at Kaiser Permanente, at the hospitals, as some 75,000 healthcare workers went on strike in Virginia, California, and 3 other states over wages and staffing shortages, marking the latest major labor unrest in the U.S. It's, of course, we know the auto workers. It's so many strikes. Kaiser is one of the largest insurers and healthcare system operators. They have 39 hospitals nationwide. One of my children, 2 of my children actually, was born at Kaiser Hospital out in California. The nonprofit company is based in Oakland, and it provides health coverage for nearly 13 million people, sending customers to clinics and hospitals it runs or contracts with to provide care. The coalition of Kaiser Permanente unions, representing about 85,000 of the health system's employees nationally, approved a strike for 3 days in California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and for 1 day in Virginia and 1 day in Washington, D.C. The strikers include licensed vocational nurses, home health aides, and ultrasound workers, as well as technicians in radiology, x-ray, surgical, pharmacy, and emergency departments. All but doctors are participating. As doctors are not participating, and Kaiser says its hospitals, including emergency rooms, will remain open during the picketing. The company said it was bringing in thousands of temporary workers to fill gaps during the strike. And that's always a problem, because those type of workers are referred to as scabs. And so we'll see how that unfolds. There's unprecedented, and Mike V mentions the writer's strike, nurses strike. There's unprecedented worker organizing, from strike authorizations to work stoppages with multiple industries this year, and that includes transportation and entertainment and hospitality. Um, Mike, yeah, the nurses as well. So we'll see how that goes for it. But that is anytime hospital workers, healthcare workers, I should say, strike, it it's a problem. It's a major problem. And so because people get sick, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, hurt, everything else, as everyday people stab, shot, killed, or hurt. Yeah, they do that every day. Um, so we need our healthcare workers taken care of. They are on the front lines, and we saw how important they were, especially during the pandemic. So we'll see what happens with the Kaiser strike. Well, as you saw in the video that preceded the opening, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell sort of lamented the fact that Kevin McCarthy was removed from speakership, and he also mentioned something I thought was very interesting: to get rid of that rule to vacate the speaker. Because, well, that's what happens when you more than compromise. You just give away the store so you can ascend to a certain position, and that's what Speaker McCarthy, former Speaker McCarthy, did back in January during those 15 humiliating rounds of votes, in which he finally ascended to the speakership. Only as someone, I have to repeat this because it was so funny to me. Um, Someone said he didn't stay speaker long enough to get a Christmas card, which was absolutely true. This guy. But still, House Majority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana and Rep. Jim Jordan, yeah, of Ohio. Jim Jordan, of course, being a major obstructionist. They both have announced that they will each run for Speaker of the House, becoming the first two candidates in the race to replace Kevin McCarthy. The race sets up a showdown that will test the abilities of both men to build support from a majority of the House GOP conference, the divides among which have been on display all year long as Republican leaders navigated a narrow 4-vote majority. In separate letters to their fellow GOP lawmakers urging their support, both Jordan and Scalise pitched themselves as unifiers who can build on the party's efforts to push back against the Biden administration's policies and advance a conservative agenda. As Austin says, Nancy Pelosi, 2,978 days as Speaker versus McCarthy, 269 days. And it's such chaos there, Austin, as you well know. Wait a second. I gotta who says that? Mike B says when you refer to Mitch McConnell as minority leader, a lot of black conservatives think he represents them. I tell you, y'all folks, y'all be coming for people early in the morning. But Jim Jordan, he's the one who also ranted against Fulton County DA Fani Willis. She, of course, handed him his lunch. Speaking of being handed his lunch, but Fani Willis handed Jim Jordan his lunch. He's been quiet ever since about that situation. It's like she put him on timeout. Like it's unreal. But nonetheless, all of this with you saw McConnell says, he's proud of McCarthy's accomplishments. What did he accomplish, folks? What did McCarthy accomplish? You can give him some credit for standing up to the extreme MAGA wing of the House when he agreed with Democrats to get that stopgap measure passed to save the government from shutting down, only for 45 days, only until November 17th, when we know, particularly if Jim Jordan, who is openly, this is not conjecture, it's not an insult, but he's openly a puppet of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has called for them to shut down the government. So if Jim Jordan gets in, Scalise, I mean, really, it's like all the time, you guys, they choose between the lesser of two evils. Who's the lesser of two evils? Evil is just evil. There's no lesser. Come on, let's be real here. But the GOP conference is highly fractured without question. There's no getting around that. But the fact is, McCarthy did a lot of this stuff to himself, as we mentioned, the 15 rounds, the giving away everything, his dignity, his family. He gave his firstborn to be the speaker temporarily, knowing that it would take a screwball like Matt Gaetz, or a Marjorie Taylor Greene to say, hey, I want him out, and that would force a vote. But he agreed to that. And that's why he's no longer speaker. And how about the Republic? You talk about petty. David Childs, good morning, Dr. Childs. Talk about petty. They kicked Nancy Pelosi, and they kicked out of her office. One of her offices. They evicted her from one of her offices after McCarthy was ousted as speaker. She's at a funeral, Dianne Feinstein's funeral, preparing for it out in California, and they decide to evict her from her office. And this is something. It's called a secret office, and this is something that speakers commonly grant to their to the former speaker. Something she's granted to former speakers, Nancy Pelosi did. And these are offices that really belong to the Senate that they don't use. And they call them hideaway offices, more better yet than secret offices. But the fact is, they are these separate offices. And look, after what happened on January 6th, where they all were running for their lives, and Jim Jordan was right there running for his life too. Hoyer lost his hideaway office as well. That's who Steny Hoyer also. Thank you, Austin. Lost his office as well. This is not about, folks, when you're going to wake up. This is not about their constituents. This is not about what's best for their constituents and what's best for America, as they say. This is about power, retribution, and making sure that they are being obstructionists. And that goes for both sides. Who's for who? Who is for you? That's what it comes down to. Who is for you? The president continues to say that he's for all Americans. He sat down for a really interesting conversation with ProPublica. And, ProPublica has been really giving us all the dirt on the Supreme Court and all of the ethics violations that Uncle Clarence Thomas has been committing. And it's been a really interesting year for them. But nonetheless, John Harwood, a correspondent, the White House, veteran White House correspondent for ProPublica, sat down and asked the president for tips on how Americans, you get that talk about, you got to sit them down. We saw that with George Floyd, right? You had folks saying, how do you talk to white folks about this? How you talk? Well, he had to talk to them. He says he wanted tips on how Americans can talk to family or friends who support Donald Trump and the MAGA crowd. He asked them about American values like democracy. And Harvard, it was a lengthy interview too. It was so interesting that you asked a question like that, I thought anyway. But in one part of the speech, Biden said, the answer to the threats we face is engagement. It's not to sit in the sidelines. It's to build coalitions and community, to remind ourselves there is a clear majority of us who believe in our democracy and are ready to protect it. Harvard picked up on that theme and asked the president, that's when he threw the zinger at him, how to talk to a MAGA parent, a MAGA neighbor, a MAGA coworker, if they're worried about such a difficult conversation. And he says, he tells Biden, he says, you said in your speech, You want average Americans who share your concerns to engage, to stand up for American values. How would you advise those people who do share your concerns, but may be worried about talking to the MAGA parent, et cetera, et cetera? How do you advise them to do that? And President Biden, of course, started off with what you expect. He says, vote, vote. He says, I was saying to my staff, they got to go out and vote. I never thought I'd see a time when someone was worried about being on a jury because there may be physical violence against them if they voted the wrong way. I never thought that would happen, he says. It's like maybe a mobster case. He says, I mean, think about that. And of course, we know there's probably going to be some major issues with selecting juries for the different trials that Donald Trump is facing. The fraud trial that he's on in New York is interesting. I mentioned the jury trial. The judge in that fraud trial, now it's a bench trial, and the judge himself even expressed like, wow, you guys never checked that box for a jury trial. And there are lawyers across the country that are scratching their heads as to why they did not. They've come to New York, sitting before Tish James, the Attorney General, thinking, I guess, that Trump scowling at her is going to be a deciding factor. When they came woefully unprepared, the judge has scolded them. And I don't know how many of you have been following the case in New York where Trump has been attending each day, scolding them for being woefully unprepared. And remember, he goes into that case already with this judge already finding that he has committed major financial fraud. So he comes in, already, you get 4 at bats, maybe 5 in the game, in a Major League Baseball game. So he comes to the plate 0 for 4 already. And the judge is like, what are you doing? What are y'all doing? And they put a gag order on him. So if he violates this gag order, this judge, and this is what it's interesting. This is the civil case. And we know that he has a few times violated the gag orders in the criminal cases. But the civil case, the judge says if he violates the order, 30 days in jail. 30 days. Thought that was also very interesting. So anyway, the president is telling folks how to talk to, how do you sit down with them? Some people you just can't talk to. Some people just won't hear any type of reason. And he says he believes that he really do believes that the vast majority of the American people are decent, honorable, straightforward. He says, I think it's a minority. And the problem with the president's thinking on that minority is what got them in this predicament in the first place, right? Thinking that the way Donald Trump viewed people and things was only the way a minority of Americans viewed and believed. Once again, 80 million people voted for Joe Biden, but at the same time, the second highest vote getter in the history of the presidential race was Donald Trump. 75 million people. That's not a minority. So again, just tell it like it is, folks. But the politicians have, it's like a disease, is to say just what it is. Be honest and open and truthful. They just don't want to catch that disease. Power 96 says the last thing on my mind is talking to a MAGA Billy cult member. He says that A.G. James is a bad woman. I would not want to face her in a courtroom. She is that mean auntie that will pop you in church. And he's scowling the whole time. Again, if you've seen any of it, the former president is sitting in the defendant's chair, of course, up front, and they allowed the cameras in the courtroom, and he's scowling. And somebody says he's playing his invisible accordion more than normal. When he does that, that means that he's really mad. You know how he talks with his hands like that. And somebody says that's his invisible accordion, and he's doing that constantly. And nonetheless, we move on. You see there he is. He's what a look on his face. Wow. He's upset. He's angry. And the president, speaking of President Biden, he announced yesterday that his administration's efforts to address student debt now includes another $9 billion in relief that the White House said goes into effect. The additional relief is set to help about 125,000 Americans, bringing the Biden administration's total approved debt cancellation to a whopping $127 billion for nearly 3.6 million Americans. A White House statement, the president says today's announcement builds on all that the administration has done to make college more affordable and ensure that student loans aren't a barrier to opportunity for students and families. The announcement comes just days after federal student loan repayment. You know it started again. Of course, it's the result of the Supreme Court's rejection of the president's pandemic era debt relief plan in June, which was aimed at canceling up to $20,000 in student debt for 43 million eligible borrowers. The newly approved $9 billion includes $5.2 billion in additional debt relief for 53,000 of who benefit from the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. The new funds that also include nearly 2.8 billion for about 51,000 borrowers on income-based repayment plans who made 20 years or more on payments but never got the relief they were entitled to, the administration said. And you think about that, 20 years. Some mortgages are 15 years, but most mortgages are 30 years. 20 years or more. They've been paying student loan debt for 20 plus years. That should be a crime in itself. It speaks to the interest on these things. If you want to, okay, let me just stop there. Another 1.2 billion of those funds will go to an estimated 22,000 borrowers who have a total or permanent disability. And of course, it'll be challenged, right? If they have a permanent disability, why not forgive them of the rest of their loans? Timothy Williams, right? A politician cannot give a straight answer. Oh boy, the White House said President Biden has long believed that college should be a ticket to the middle class, not a burden that weighs on families. Following the Supreme Court's decision to invalidate the original plan, which would have eliminated about 400 billion in student debt, the president has implemented alternate measures to try to chip away at the nationwide debt. In June, Biden announced that borrowers would have the ability to enroll in a temporary 12-month, quote, on-ramp repayment program that would remove the threat of default or harm to borrowers' credit. He also stated borrowers would not need to use more than 5% of their discretionary income to pay undergraduate loans, down from a previous cap of 10%. So there we have it. The Americans Disability Act. Mike V says the Americans with Disabilities Act will be a good way to make their case for cancellation. Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly why the president has opted to go this route and include those borrowers in this as well. But just imagine 20 plus years paying back a student loan. That means some of them, a lot of them, may have even retired from their job, from their employment, and still are paying student loan. Think about that. Hmm. Well, on the day that the public records revealed that Elon Musk has become Twitter's biggest shareholders, an unknown sender texted the billionaire and recommended an article imploring him to acquire the social network outright. His purchase of Twitter, the 3,000 word anonymous article said, would amount to a declaration of war against the quote globalist American empire. The sender of the text was offering Elon Musk, who of course is also the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla. They were offering him a playbook for the takeover and transformation of Twitter. And so, as the anniversary of the purchase approaches, the identity of the sender, sender still remains unknown, right? The three texts were sent on April 4th, 2022. In the nearly 18 months since then, many of the decisions that Elon made after he bought Twitter appear to have closely followed that roadmap, up to and including his ongoing attacks against the Anti-Defamation League, which is, of course, a nonprofit organization founded by Jewish Americans to counter discrimination. Well, the text message described a series of actions that Elon would take after he gained full control of Twitter. Step one, it says, these are quotes: blame the platform for its users. Step two, coordinated pressure campaign. Step three, the exodus of the blue checks. And step four, deplatforming. The messages from the unknown sender, I don't know why I keep saying center, were revealed in a court filing as evidence in a lawsuit Twitter brought against Elon after he tried to back out of the deal to buy it. The redacted documents were unearthed by the Chancery Daily, an independent legal publication covering proceedings before the Delaware Court of Chancery. The wording of the text matches the subtitles of the article, The Battle of the Century. Here's what happens if Elon Musk buys Twitter, which had been published 3 days earlier on the right-wing website revolver.news. The article was published with no byline, which is, of course, a common practice where writers also appear to use pseudonyms such as Moxie Russo. Moxie Russo. The site is run by the far-right blogger Darren Beatty, a former Trump, of course, right? A former Trump White House speechwriter who was fired in 2018 for having spoken on a panel alongside white nationalists. After the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, Beatty promoted the baseless claim that the FBI had planted agents in the crowds who incited it to storm the building. So when the text messages to Elon were revealed in the court filing, observers suggested on Twitter that Beatty himself may have sent them. And asked by NBC News whether he knew who sent the text and who wrote the article, Beatty declined to comment and instead suggested that the ADL should be investigated without providing any specifics as to why. He says, I think I'm familiar with it, but I am not in a position to comment on it. I wish I could give you something else, but you should look into the ADL. The article on Beatty's site begins with a baseless claim that censorship on Twitter cost former President Trump the 2020 election. It says free speech online is what enabled the Trump revolution in 2016, the anonymous author wrote. But if the internet had been as free in 2020 as it was 4 years before, Trump would have cruised to re-election. The author said that step one after a Musk takeover would be blame the platform for its users. He or she predicted that Twitter would be blamed for every so-called act of racism, sexism, and transphobia that occurred on its platform. After Elon purchased Twitter, after it was finalized in October of last year, he allowed previously suspended accounts to return. Among them, he restored the account of Trump, who Twitter had banned after the January 6th insurrection, as well as the personal accounts of far-right rep Marjorie Taylor Greene and the founder of a neo-Nazi website, Andrew Anglin. The article then predicted that step 2 would involve as we said, a coordinated pressure campaign by the ADL and other nonprofit groups to get Elon to reinstate the banned accounts. It says, quote, a vast constellation of activists and nonprofits will lurch into action to put more and more pressure on the company to change its ways. The next step, the Revolver News article predicted, would be the exodus of the blue checks. And we know what happened there, right? The term blue checks, of course, refers to a former identity verification system on Twitter that confirmed the authenticity of the accounts of celebrities, public figures, and journalists. Elon experimented with and ultimately eliminated Twitter's verification system of blue checks. As the article predicted, the removal resulted in public backlash and an exponential drop in advertisers and revenue. I mean, talk about wow. But other developments, including Elon's drastically reducing the number of staffers who monitor tweets and a rise in hate speech, also contributed to the dynamic. And of course, we mentioned step 4, which would be deplatforming of Twitter itself. And he said an Elon-owned Twitter would face the same fate as Parler, a platform that presented itself as a free speech home for the right. After numerous calls for violence on January 6th were posted on Parler, Google and Apple removed it from their app stores on the grounds that it had allowed too many posts that promoted violence, crime, and misinformation. And throughout your timelines on Twitter, regardless of whether you follow certain entities, folks, or not, it's a laundry list of this stuff. Misinformation, just all types of crazy stuff on Twitter. So this was a really interesting find. And so we see Elon has followed that far right, extreme, racist pattern that they said would be those 4 steps. It's really interesting. Wow. Well, folks, tomorrow we have a little bit of a treat for you. If you join us tomorrow, you'll see why. The funky drummer himself is joining us from the Ohio Players. The legendary drummer James Diamond Williams will be right here on Let It Be Known. 50 years with the Ohio Players. Y'all remember they really got their start, not necessarily their start, but they started to take off after Funky Worm. And then we all remember Fire. And we all remember that Honey album. If you didn't remember the Honey album, you remember the Honey cover. That's for sure. Power 96, I know, had probably framed the Honey cover, put it on his wall, right? But we're going to be talking to the great funky drummer who has some great stories. James Diamond Williams, right here on Let It Be Known tomorrow. So tune in, 7:30 a.m. Eastern time and throughout the day right here. Check us out tomorrow. And thanks for joining Let It Be Known.